Folks, welcome into another edition of the Roundtable right here on SportsbookReview.com. The draft, we have it right in our crosshairs, and this is a fun topic to talk about that I want to bring in my esteemed panel today. Gary Seegers, Jeff Nadeau, and Teddy Savransky. Gary, I'm going to talk to you first here, because when we talk about betting props, we've done that already. I want to take a look at the actual athletes themselves, because in the draft, it's not an exact science. We've seen Ryan Leaf, Jamarcus Russell, Tony Manders all bust in the draft. So my question to you, Gary, is give me somebody high up, like maybe a first-round pick that you say, you know what? I'm not drafting that guy. He might be a bust.
I'm going to give you two of them. Quarterback Justin Herbert. Everybody is in love with the size. Everybody loves the arm strength, etc. Look, Mike Renner from Pro Football Focus, he pointed out the percentage of uncatchable off-target passes that were targeted to an open receiver that he missed. 18.1%. on passes 5 to 18 yards downfield. He's not accurate. 1 out of every 5 passes he completely whiffs on. I don't like a quarterback that isn't accurate with his passes. When you look at the other guys in the draft, Jalen Hurts, 5%. Tua, the lowest at 4.1. Joe Burrow, 5.1%. And then you got guys like Jordan Love that are back at 14%. And Herbert is 18.1%. That's not good. There's obviously other things that I don't necessarily like. He didn't exactly show out at Oregon this year. The other one, Mekhi Becton, offensive lineman, massive numbers at the combine. 6'7", 360 some odd pounds, runs a 5.140. Here's the deal, though. You don't really need an offensive lineman to run a 5.140. He's insanely athletic. I get that. But if you go look at the style of offense that Louisville ran this past year under Scott Satterfield, it didn't exactly set up to showcase his abilities. He ranked 108 and 118 in his first 2 years at Pro Football Focus. This past year, he ranked 30th, which is great, but he only lined up in 73 true pass sets, and on 8 of them, he allowed a rush. He allowed pressure. That's not good odds. Becton looks great. Herbert looks great. You know, all the measurables are there, but when you really dig down into the film, these are not first-round players. Whoever takes them early may be regretting it.
Look at that. We are swinging from the heels here coming right out of the gate. Jeff, look, we're from the Philadelphia area. We're no stranger to bust. We've had firemen drafted to play guard. We've had Marcus Smith come out of Louisville taking a nap in the first round because he knew he wasn't a first-round pick, getting hit in the first round. Jeff, looking at this draft here, round one, who's busting out here?
Yeah, we might be here till 5 or 6 Eastern if you wanted me to talk about this team's inability to draft, but we're not here for that. I'm going to go a little bit deeper in the first round. I'm not a big Denzel Mims guy. I don't. I have some real concerns about him off the field as opposed to on. First of all, on the field, he's got a really big drop problem. Some of his drop problems are actually pronounced. I mean, he was, I think, out of all the receivers, had the most drops. But my look on the outside is some of the concerns of, is he actually ready to be an adult in our society? I mean, you read some of these comments coming out of his first trip outside of his hometown of Dangerfield, Texas. That's about 2,000 people in it, for anyone who doesn't know. I mean, you hear some very concerning comments, like comments to the point of like, can he actually function in a city that's not his? I mean, he talked about going to Philadelphia and that, look, I know Philadelphia's a scary place. I've been in and out of it my whole life. It is a scary place, but he talks about he's actually saw people he was scared of. And I want my receiver confident. I want him to be able to come in and be someone that can handle himself on his own. Donnie, we had a guy named Nelson Aguilar here for a lot of years. One of Nelson Aguilar's biggest problems was his confidence in himself. He never matriculated because of it, and he was a complete bust because of it. Denzel Mims concerns me. He needs to go somewhere like Green Bay or some smaller town where I think he could be a little bit more invasive. He's not a confident enough player for me. I have some real concerns with the drops as well.
Yeah, no, reading between the lines always goes a long way in this. Teddy, swinging and missing in the draft. Look, swinging and missing in life, I've done it many times. Swinging and missing in the draft, the NFL guys do it all the time, GMs and front offices. Teddy, in your mind, looking at this draft, specifically maybe round one, we're looking at this saying, you know what? I'm steering clear of this guy right here. He might be a bust.
Well, there's a couple of guys like that. Heck, half the first round is like that. And make no mistake about it, okay? The NFL teams with, multi-million-dollar scouting budgets and all the bells and whistles that you can have, every advanced metric you can come up with, they get it wrong, and they get it wrong more than half the time. So sometimes it's actually easier for guys like us who all watch college football and watch it, in a real way, to say, hey, maybe this guy's not all that, and a couple of names mentioned. Herbert, I'm with you, Gary. I'm not sold on Herbert. However, there's multiple other guys I'm not sold on. Let's talk about Brandon Ayuk, who's going up the boards at wide receiver. Another guy, look at his numbers at the combine. You watch Brandon Ayuk for Arizona State last year, you're like, this is not a first-round talent. So he's someone I absolutely have as, his measurables are good. On the field last year, he did not stand out to me. There's a guy who did stand out to me on the field last year, Jonathan Taylor for Wisconsin. Again, I'm not an RB guy, but Swift is the best RB in the draft, and Jonathan Taylor looks to me like Ron Dane, a guy that's going to come in 3 yards in a cloud of dust and be nothing in the NFL level and get drafted way too high. So of all the guys, maybe he'd be the number one I would look to avoid in the front. Him moving up to the first round, Ayuk moving up to the first round, I'm not buying either guy.
Interesting. Maybe got some busts. And look, when we're taking a look at the quarterback position, and Teddy brings up a good point, the first day probably going to have 25 to 30% people in the first round bust out anyway. So we'll see if this video does hold true over time. Let's get into another interesting one here, because we see it all the time. The risers in the draft. And it doesn't have to be from 3 weeks ago. It can even be from 24 hours out, even right up to the draft. Gary, I'm going to bring you in here. Give me a guy that you might see outside. So you know what? This guy may be projected to be a later first round guy, all of a sudden moving up the charts. Give me a riser that you have your eye on that you figure, you know what? This guy might be taken a little bit earlier than some of us thought.
Minnesota safety Antoine Winfield. When he came out, everybody expected second or third round. He has worked his way up the board. As people dig into his actual game film, the guy's unbelievable. He's great at coverage, graded over 89 at Pro Football Focus for the season for the last 2 years. He's unbelievable. He was a junior coming out. Everybody thought maybe the size, et cetera, would hurt him. I don't think so. Everything that I've seen, he may end up being a first-round pick. He is as pure of a safety as you can get in coverage. I'm looking for Antoine Winfield to move up. I think he's a big-time riser.
Row the boat here, Jeff. I'm going to bring you in on this topic here. Risers in the draft. Give me one of those guys that's burning up the board. You say, no, we might not have saw this a few weeks ago or even maybe a week up to the draft, but this guy might get drafted ahead of what we thought he was going to be.
Donnie, all we hear about in this draft is how good this receiver group is. And I would agree, and I think all the folks here on the panel would agree. It is the deepest. There's so many different types of receivers you can grab. To me, a guy nobody will talk about, but I think he's a second-round talent. I really do. And if you listen to the Buffalo Bills, they've been in big contact with this guy. Donnie, I've talked about him, and I've talked about him more. Antonio Gandy Golden, out of Liberty University, 6'4", 223. Okay, he did 22 reps at the combine. He's incredibly strong. He's incredibly fast. He's got hands like magnets. He's basically the opposite of Denzel Mims. He's a confident kid. He was in an offense that loves to throw the football. I think he could burn a lot of guys. And you look at his yak stuff last year, he was one of the best players in the country, shedding blockers and getting extra yards, creating big plays. I think he's a guy that could really turn into a really good player in this league. He's got the size. I think he surprises a lot of players with his speed and how big he is. I think Antonio Gandy Golden's a fascinating player. He was a guy I think a lot of people thought was a third or fourth round pick. I think he could surprise some people and be drafted on Friday.
There you go. Team total overs with Antonio Gandy Golden. Certainly good back in college. So I'm going to bring you in, rising from the ashes like the Phoenix. Who's going to move up this draft board, Teddy, that we should have an eye on?
So this is a draft where I'm confident there's going to be a run on offensive linemen. All right, there's 4 that are going to go in the top 12 or 13 or 14, and then there's kind of a gap. I think the next lineman taken, and I do think he's going to go in the first round, Ezra Cleveland, the kid out of Boise State. And again, I'm out here in Vegas. I see a lot of Mountain West football. This kid's real. The Boise State prospects in general have done well in the NFL, both on the offensive line, on the defense. I mean, the skill position talent maybe hasn't done as much as some might have thought, but the Boise kids are coming in hungry and they're performing like stars. And this kid, Ezra Cleveland, again, the size is there, the athleticism is there. From everything I've read, the mental capacity is there. I think he goes in the first round. So there's a bunch of different ways you can bet that. But he's someone who, he's not a true sleeper per se, but he's someone who right now is still getting a second round grade that I think is going to go a good notch or two earlier.
All right, let's flip this back, Gary. I'm going to bring you back into the conversation here because we're talking about guys that can move up the draft board on draft night, but we also have the opposite effect that's going to take place. One of those where I can't believe this guy is still on the board at this pick. We saw it a few years ago there with Alex Smith and Aaron Rodgers. Either one of these guys could go number one. One goes number one. The next one goes into the 20s. Who can you see maybe slipping and sliding here in the draft here, Gary?
Initially, I would have told you Laviska Shenault, but I think that's an easy one with the medicals and whatnot that have come out the last few days. I'm going to go Jordan Love. I think Jordan Love could end up dropping well late into the 20s. If you go and look at his film, obviously he had a fantastic season his sophomore year. This last year, his junior year, not so good. If you look at the numbers, percentage of pass attempts that resulted in a quarterback faulted incompletion, 17.3%. That was number 91 out of 106 eligible quarterbacks. That is not good when the quarterback is the reason for the incompletions. He's not accurate. He's not very good. It's a boom or bust, and in a draft like this, you don't have to take a risk like that early. I could see him maybe dropping into the second round. I know people love quarterbacks. He will probably still go in the 20s. But everybody that was talking about the odds of him maybe going in the early teens, that's not going to happen. He's fallen down.
The one good thing here, Gary, about the draft, too, is if you are a quarterback and you figured you were going in that teen range or maybe that top 10 range and you slide back, unless we have a virtual green room, I don't think we're going to have that camera certainly always being on the play. Like, ooh, another team pick there. He's going to slide back. So it should be interesting to watch if they do have a virtual green room. Jeff, let me bring you into this conversation here. Slipping down the draft. Who are we looking at?
Yeah, this one pains me because I like the kid a lot. I think he, on my board, I have him high. I just look at what everyone else is going to think. I think Gary made a good point about Mekhi Becton. He might be one of my favorite players in this draft. I think he's a fascinating kid. He's so big and so fast and so powerful. But you look at some of the things coming out. I mean, obviously, Gary made a good point about some of his tape. It might not necessarily tell the tale. You also look at the fact that he did have a failed drug test, which starts to hurt players. You also look at the fact that he's 367 pounds, 365 pounds. There's this odd report comes out that he loves to cook. And look, GMs are weird people. They turn themselves off on certain guys. Will Mekhi Becton get into the point of where, he just kind of becomes okay with who he is, and maybe he just doesn't give his all on what he maybe thought we thought he would give? There's just too many red flags I feel like starting to pop up with Mekhi Becton. It sucks because I think the kid's fascinating, but there's just too many things popping up. It wouldn't surprise me, especially with all the good offensive linemen. Teddy mentioned the offensive line group. There's some really good players. He mentioned Ezra Cleveland, guys like Andrew Thomas. It wouldn't surprise me if Becton kind of falls a little bit, maybe the way a Cody Ford did last year. It's concerning.
What's interesting about this, Teddy, because, you can always equate it to our childhoods growing up, chutes and ladders. You get all the way up top to 88, and then you slip all the way down to that number 4 block here, Teddy. Who has a chance to say, you know what? Boy, I was looking fresh and ready. I got my watch on. I'm ready to go top 10. Oops, now I'm not going to be top 10.
Well, let me start with this, is that Gary stole my thunder on Herbert, because he was absolutely on my level. Herbert, Love, Fromm, Eason, Jalen Hurts. There's 2 quarterbacks in this draft, okay? There's Joe Burrow and there's Tua Tagovailoa, and that's it. All right? So whoever then someone's going to reach for one of these guys, but the guy who I think is going to drop is probably Love, but, I mean, Fromm could drop like a rock in this draft. And again, the eye test, he didn't pass it. Jacob Eason could drop like a rock in this draft. They're talking Bryce Perkins is going to get drafted. These are not NFL quarterbacks. None of them are starting NFL quarterbacks. So I personally think that the QBs after and it may even be after one, it may even be after the Burrow, that the QBs are going to drop up and down the board. And whether it's Herbert, Love, Fromm, Eason, I'll take the under on all those guys. I don't think and that comes in part from my own thought process that there's not a lot of NFL ready QBs this year. And that includes most of the guys I just listed.
One thing's for sure on this draft board right here, nobody on this draft class right here is a bust. And I'm talking about Gary Seegers, Jeff Nadeau, and Teddy Safransky. Thanks for tuning in once again to another edition of the Roundtable on sportsbookview.com. For busts, for high risers, for people falling in the draft, it's all right here at sportsbookreview.com.